お待たせいたしました。
Thank you very much for your patience. And now let us begin the Nobel Peace Prize Conference in Tokyo, responding to the threat of nuclear weapons. This conference is hosted by the Norwegian Nobel Institute and co-hosted by Sophia University and Nihon Hidankyo, the Japan Confederation of A and H Plus Organization. I am today's moderator, Naoki Umemiya, Vice Director, Human Resource Center for International Cooperation, Sophia University. Thank you. Thank you. First, on behalf of the university, let me invite Dr. Sophia Agustin, Chancellor, Sophia School Corporation, to give us an opening address. Could you please come up to the podium, Dr. Sally?
Committee, Mr. Johan Freinas, Chair of Nihon Hidankyo Committee, Mr. Tanaka Teruzama, and all our distinguished guests and participants. Welcome to Sophia University. I am Sally Agustin, Chancellor of Sophia School Corporation. In September 2018, Sophia University hosted a symposium titled The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the Role of Religion in Japan. It was immediately after the ICANN was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. At the award ceremony on December 10, 2017, Hiroshima atomic bomb survivor and Canadian President Cisco Thurlow and with the ICANN Executive Director Beatrice Finn delivered speeches. Both emphasized a shared message. A society that relies on nuclear weapons is abnormal. In 2024, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Nihon Hidankyo. And once again, my congratulations on their vigorous activities. On the other hand, sections of our international community still continue to assert that nuclear weapons are legitimate and that peace and stability are maintained through the presence of nuclear weapons. However, ethically and morally, nuclear weapons are indiscriminate weapons of mass destruction and cannot be reconciled with international humanitarian law. If nuclear war were to occur, humanity would face annihilation. Thus, these weapons can be called suicidal weapons. Entrusting our survival to such weapons of mass destruction is truly abnormal. The theory of peace through nuclear weapons is one of domination, ideology, and retaliation. I hope that the Nobel Committee's recognition of Nihon Hidankyo is a clear message that we cannot coexist with nuclear weapons, and it is commendable. However, this recognition must not remain symbolic. All people, including people in the area of education and research, have to ensure efforts of the safety of human persons and human society. Sophia University, guided by Christian humanism, fosters individuals with a spirit of neighborliness and internationalism in line with our founding philosophy of Sophia bringing the world together and our educational principle for others with others. I am happy to announce that in December 2024, last year, Sophia University joined the University Alliance of the Catholic Church's initiative Partnership for a World Without Nuclear Weapons. Finally, let me remember late Pope Francis visiting our university and delivered a message to our community in this very hall in 2019. He stated, "No student should graduate from this university without having consciously understood what is best and having acquired the ability to choose freely and responsibly. In every situation, no matter how complex, act justly, humanely, and with a sense of responsibility that serves as a model for others." I wish and pray that together with Sophia University's educational mission, this international conference may serve as an opportunity to further strengthen our human and social responsibility. I want to thank all the collaborators for your sincere contribution to this project. Thank you very much.
Chancellor Sally Augustine, thank you very much. We now would like to proceed to the keynote lectures. We first of all would like to give the microphone to Mr. Jørgen Vatne Friednes, Chair, Norwegian Nobel Committee. The title of his keynote lecture is Upholding the Nuclear Taboo, A Call to Humanity. Mr. Friednes, the floor is yours. Let's welcome him with a round of applause.
Honorable guests, dear Nobel laureates, respected hibakusha, students, and friends. This past October, the Norwegian Nobel Committee awarded the 2024 Nobel Peace Prize to Nihon Hidankyo. The prize recognized their tireless efforts to achieve a world free of atomic weapons and their extraordinary, decades-long commitment to testifying about the unspeakable human consequences of nuclear war. Their voices, your voices, are a moral compass in a world that sometimes forgets its direction. You remind us what nuclear weapons really are. Not abstract tools of deterrence, but instruments of mass death. You remind us that history is not a string of numbers and slogans, but the flesh, blood, and memory of individual lives. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as the only cities to suffer nuclear attack, occupy a unique place in the moral imagination of the world. But that memory must be carried by all of us. That is why it is so meaningful to be here for the first time in the history of the Nobel Prize in Japan to reflect on how we honor and carry forward the work of the hibakusha. The hibakusha are not only victims of war, you are witnesses and teachers. You have turned ashes into testimony, and testimony into global awareness. Over time, an international norm took shape, one that stigmatizes the use of nuclear weapons as morally unacceptable. That norm is often referred to as the nuclear taboo. It is not written in stone. It exists only because enough people across enough nations believe in it. It survives through collective memory and through collective moral resistance. But the taboo is fragile, and memory fades. That is why we must listen, especially now. We stand, as many analysts say, and warn that the edge of a new and more unstable nuclear age. Nuclear powers are modernizing their arsenals. New states appear to be preparing to acquire them. Treaties expire. Threats of nuclear use are made openly, even as war rages on. In the face of this, we must return to the truth at the heart of the Hibakusha's message, not just geographically, but morally. Because the significance of awarding the Nobel Peace Prize to Nihon Hidankyo lies in this: to lift up a human voice in a time of geopolitical noise, to anchor disarmament in memory, to remind the world that we are not doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. We can learn. But learning requires memory, and memory demands effort. That is why your work to collect and preserve materials, your testimonies, photographers, diaries, artifacts, is of such global importance. This is not only Japanese history, it is world history, and it must not be lost in time to bureaucracy or to indifference. Today's generation of students and young people cannot touch 1945, but they can read a diary. They can hear the trembling voice of a hibakusha, unbroken. They can choose not to forget. We know that survivors are aging. Time is precious. That makes the task of preservation even more sacred. Let me say this clearly. The work of remembrance that you do through your museums, archives, literature, art, and education is peace work. It is part of disarmament. It is part of building the world we want our children to live in. As we said in Oslo in December last year, memory work can be an act of resistance, a force for change. There are those who wish to forget, out of convenience or political gain, but we must not let that happen. As the South Korean writer Han Kang, who received the Nobel Prize in Literature last year, has written, "Through our pained and silent embrace over the course of a whole life, life is, perhaps paradoxically, made possible." That is what the hibakusha have done. You have made life possible, not just survival, but life with meaning, with dignity, and with hope. Hope for us all. To all the survivors and to those who continue your work, you stood tall when others choose denial. You refuse to be defined by victimhood. You help the world see, with clear eyes, what nuclear weapons really mean. You are the light the world needs. To the people of Japan, your story is universal. Your national memory is a global responsibility. And I assure you, your voice was heard in Oslo. It is heard today, and it will be heard tomorrow if we others have the courage to keep listening. To the young people in this room, you are the future custodians of this memory. You are the new stewards of this truth. Take up the torch. Do not let silence grow. Tell the stories. Study the history. Resist the forgetting. Raise your voice. Because, as we said in Oslo, December last year, our survival depends on it. Let me end with the words of Bertrand Russell and Albert Einstein, spoken in 1955 and still ringing with painful relevance. There lies before you, if we choose, continual progress in happiness, knowledge, and wisdom. Shall we instead choose death, because we cannot forget our quarrels? We appeal as human beings to human beings. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. And let me add, from here in Tokyo, remember your courage. Remember your testimonies. Remember your light. Thank you.
Thank
you very much, Chair Friedness. And now we would like to invite Mr. Terumi Tanaka, co-chairperson, Nihon Hidankyo. The lecture title is The Legacy of Nihon Hidankyo and the Future of the Nuclear Abolition Movement. Please join me in welcome Mr. Tanaka. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I am Tanaka Terumi of Nihon Hidankyo. On August 6 and 9, 1945, hundreds of thousands of people, including women and children, were exposed to the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, respectively, by the U.S. military. About 210,000 people were killed by the end of that year. The survivors who had lost relatives and loved ones were forced to remain silent by the occupation forces for 7 years after the bombing, and we were also abandoned by the Japanese government even after restoring sovereignty. They spent more than a decade after the bombings in isolation, suffering from illness, hardships in life, and endured prejudice and discrimination. The U.S. hydrogen bomb test at the Bikini Atoll on March 1, 1954, resulted in the exposure of many Japanese fishing boats, including Daigo Fukuryumaru, to deadly radioactive fallout or the ashes of death. This incident triggered a nationwide petition calling for a total ban on atomic and hydrogen bomb and test, which spread like a wildfire throughout Japan. Encouraged by the Second World Conference against the A and H bombs held in Nagasaki following the First World Conference in 1955 in Hiroshima, the Japan Confederation of A and H bomb sufferers organization, Nihon Hidankyo, was founded on August 10, 1956. In her founding declaration, Nihon Hidankyo expressed our determination to save humanity from its crisis through the lessons learned from our experiences, while at the same time saving ourselves. Since then, we have carried out a movement upholding the two fundamental demands: the abolition of nuclear weapons and the state compensation for the atomic bomb damage suffered. Our demand that the state which started and carried out the war should compensate the victims for the damage caused by the atomic bombs gained broad public support and moved the government. In 1957, A-bomb sufferers medical care law, and in 1968, the law concerning special measures for A-bomb sufferers were enacted. However, the content of these measures were limited to the scope of the social security system, like issuing the hibakusha certificates, providing free medical examinations and covering medical expenses, and providing several types of allowances only for illnesses identified by the Ministry of Health and Welfare as A-bomb related. The government adamantly denies the compensation for the dead, the greatest victims of the A-bombing, saying that the sacrifice of a war should be endured equally by the whole nation. In 1977, an international symposium on the damage and after effects of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was held in Japan, under the auspices of NGOs associated with the UN, clarifying the reality of the damage caused by the atomic bombings to human beings. Further, in 1985, Nihon Hidankyo conducted a nationwide survey of atomic bomb victims, which revealed that the damage inflicted on the A-bomb victims had impacted their lives, bodies, minds, and livelihoods. Their lives had been stolen, they had suffered physical and psychological scars, and had struggled to work due to illness and prejudice. The results of the survey strongly supported the basic demands of the A-bomb survivors, reinforcing their determination that no one in the world should again be allowed to experience the horrific suffering they had gone through. In December 1994, the law concerning relief to atomic bomb survivors, A-bomb survivors relief law, was enacted, combining the former two laws. However, no compensation was provided for the hundreds of thousands of deaths, and to this day, the Japanese government has consistently refused to provide state compensation, limiting its measures to radiation damage only. In a democratic country, the state and the people are considered to be on equal footing. The government must properly compensate the people for the damage caused by wars that it has waged. This is not limited to Japan, and I hope that the rulers of any country in the world will be firmly aware of this responsibility. Believing that nuclear weapons, absolutely inhumane weapons for mass killing, should not coexist with the human race, we have continued our movement to call for the immediate elimination of nuclear weapons, urging our government, the nuclear weapon states, and all the other states to take action. Around 1980, faced with the threat of a nuclear war, large rallies of hundreds of thousands of people took place in many countries in Europe, and the hibakusha were asked to give a testimony at these rallies. In 1978 and 82, nearly 40 representatives of Nihon Hidankyo participated in the UN Special Sessions on Disarmament held at the UN headquarters in New York. Our representatives spoke in the General Assembly Hall and gave testimony at many local gatherings. Representatives of Nihon Hidankyo have also secured opportunities to speak at the review conferences of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the preparatory committee meetings. During the review conference, Hidankyo held A-bomb exhibitions in the main lobby of the UN General Assembly Hall. During the review conference, a representative of the Japan Confederation of A and H-bomb sufferers organization held an A-bomb exhibition in the lobby of the General Conference Hall at the UN headquarters and gave testimony to representatives of various countries and the citizens of New York achieving great success. In April 2016, A-bomb survivors around the world launched the international signature campaign in support of the appeal of the Hibakusha for the elimination of nuclear weapons as proposed by Nihon Hidankyo. The campaign grew significantly. Over 13.7 million signatures were collected and submitted to the UN. We overenjoyed that on July 7, 2017, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was adopted with the support of 122 countries and entered into force in January 2021. In the heartfelt desire of the Hibakusha that rather than depending on the theory of a nuclear deterrence, which assumes the possession and use of nuclear weapons, we must not allow the possession of a single nuclear weapon. The nuclear weapons now on this planet can immediately cause damage hundreds of thousands of times greater than what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And currently, more than 12,000 do exist on this planet. As any of you could become either a victim or a perpetrator at any time, and therefore I sincerely urge everyone around the world to discuss together what we must do to eliminate nuclear weapons and demand action from governments to achieve this goal. The average age of A-bomb survivors is now over 86. From now on, I hope that you will try to listen to the voices of Hibakusha who can still share their stories with you, and the next generation will find ways to build on our efforts and develop movement even further. We Hibakusha hope to see further universalization of TPNW and the formulation of an international convention which will abolish nuclear weapons. For this, I urge everyone around the world to create opportunity in your own countries to listen to the testimonies of A-bomb survivors and to feel with deep sensitivity the true inhumanity of nuclear weapons. Particularly, I hope the belief that the nuclear weapon cannot and must not coexist with humanity will take firm hold among citizens of the nuclear weapon states and their allies, and this will become a force for change in the nuclear policy of their governments. Let not humanity destroy itself with nuclear weapons. Let us work together for a human society in a world free of nuclear weapons and of wars. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was Mr. Tanaka, co-chairperson of Nihon Hidankyo. Next, we call upon Ms. Kodama Michiko, Assistant Secretary General of Nihon Hidankyo. The title of her keynote lecture is A World Without Nuclear Weapons and Without Wars for the Next Generation. Let's welcome Ms. Kodama with a round of applause. Thank you for your kind introduction. I am Kodama Michiko of Nihon Hidankyo. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima on August 6th and Nagasaki on August 9th, 1945, cruelly took so many innocent lives in just an instant. I am a Hibakusha of Hiroshima. At that time, I was a 7-year-old girl, a second grader in a primary school, and at that moment was inside the wooden school building. Suddenly, I felt a blinding flash and blast. Sharp splinters of window panes flew all around and struck into the walls, desks, floor of the classroom and into my skin, but fortunately, My injuries were minor, just cuts by shattered glass. My father managed to come to the school to find me. On my way home, carried on my father's back, I witnessed hell on earth. I saw a man with his skin burnt heavily and peeled. A mother with heavy burns was carrying a baby, which was burnt black and looked like charcoal. Some had their eyeballs popped out, and others ran around trying to escape while holding their protruding intestines in their hands. "Water, please give me water." One after another, people came up to me, to my father, begging for water, but we were unable to do anything for them. All we could do was just hurried home. Among those begging for help, there was a little girl so badly burned, and she couldn't even speak. She was alone. I guess that she was around the same age as myself. Her eyes pleaded for help and water. Her look is still etched in my mind. I couldn't do anything for her, not even call out or give water to her. We passed her, but I looked back because I was worried. She had already collapsed on the ground. It is very painful to remember her appearance. The atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The bomb was called Little Boy, carried by B-29 bomber Enola Gay, and exploded 600 meters above the ground. It was a uranium type A bomb. Then the radiation, powerful heat rays, blast, and shock waves instantly covered and destroyed the entire city of Hiroshima. I should have been killed on that day. Until some weeks before the atomic bombing, my family lived near the hypocenter, and I used to go to a school located 350 meters from the hypocenter. But our family moved away, and I changed school. If we hadn't moved, neither myself nor my family would have survived. Later, I learned that about 400 pupils and 11 teachers in my old school were burned and killed instantaneously by the bomb, leaving no traces, not even their ashes. My favorite cousin, who was like a big sister to me, had been mobilized to work around the area 500 meters from the blast center. Half of her face, her entire back down to her ankle, were severely burned, sore and raw. Her burns quickly festered. Maggots spread and crawled around all over her body. She cried in a small voice, calling to me for help. "Michan, Michan, Michiko." On the morning of the third day, August 9th, she breathed her last breath in my little arms. She was a 14-year-old student. Another cousin, who was a 10-year-old boy, was suffering from diarrhea, although he had no serious injuries. One day he began to bleed from his nose, vomited lots of blood clots from his mouth, and suddenly died. This was the horror of radiation. Even if they appeared okay in their appearance, their bodies had been fatally damaged internally. Some people lost their hair in bunches. Others developed purple spots all over their faces and bodies, or suffered from repeated diarrhea and vomited blood. Many died, one after another. Such symptoms were said to be contagious, and people got scared. Hibakusha, who miraculously survived, had to live with the feeling of guilt that they were the only survivors, and with the sights, sounds, voices, and smells of hell still burned in their minds. The suffering of the hibakusha is deep and unending, with financial hardship, prejudice, and discrimination in the society. Even after 80 years, the memory of that day never goes away. Years after the atomic bombing, both my mother and father died of cancer. When I got pregnant after marriage, I wavered and suffered over possible radiation effect on the baby, but I finally decided to give birth to my daughter. She grew up to be a bright and healthy girl, but she died at the age of 45 from cancer, only 4 months after the onset of the disease, which has given me deep sorrow and vexation. In 2017, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was adopted. That year in October, my youngest brother died of multiple myeloma, and in December, another brother of mine who was 5 years old at the time of the bombing died of multiple primary cancers. The atomic bomb killed both my brothers. Every day I feel frustrated and lonely, wondering if I will be the next to die. Hibakusha are hibakusha until the end of their lives. There is no escape from being a hibakusha. We must not allow the suffering of hell that we have experienced to be repeated on the people of the world. And we have continued to share the reality of the A-bomb damage both inside and outside Japan, calling for no more hibakusha and abolish nuclear weapons. In 2021, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons entered into force. However, the government of Japan, the only country to have suffered the atomic bombings in war, continues to turn its back on the treaty. It's totally deplorable. Japan is called on to play a leading role in the world to achieve the abolition of nuclear weapons. The wars that are shaking the world today are fierce battles destroying schools and hospitals and taking the lives of many people. Whenever I see these images, I recall myself 79 years ago, and my body trembles and tears well up in my eyes. The current situation in the world regarding nuclear weapons is extremely difficult. If nuclear weapons are ever used again, whether it be intentionally or accidentally, there will be tremendous damage to the future. Why can't we make diplomatic efforts to avoid war rather than resort to deterrence and security through nuclear weapons? There must be wisdom to value all life on Earth. We call for diplomatic efforts through dialogue without giving up. War that takes the lives of our future generation is a war for what purpose and for whom? Dear friends, the existence of nuclear weapons on the Earth is in itself unacceptable from a humanitarian standpoint. I sincerely appeal to all of you. Please do not create another hibakusha. It is we human beings who create and use nuclear weapons, and it is we who can stop the use of nuclear weapons and who can eliminate nuclear weapons. We must pass on a safe, secure, and hopeful blue Earth to the next generation. Thank you very much.
Ms. Kodama, Assistant Secretary General at Nihon Hidankyo, thank you very much. Chair Friedenes said, quote, Hibakusha, your witness and the teachers, unquote. Those A-bomb sufferers have given us, as teachers, opportunities to learn from history. Then Mr. Tanaka stressed the necessity of trying to listen to the voices of the hibakusha who can still share their experiences now that the average age of the A-bomb survivors is over 86 years old, and the necessity of the next generation finding ways to build on their efforts and develop the movement even further. Ms. Kodama said, quote, the wars that are shaking the world today are fierce battle, destroying schools and hospitals and taking the lives of many people. Whenever I see these images, I find myself 79 years ago, unquote. Three speakers once again strongly presented the necessity of abolishing nuclear weapons. I'd like to express my great appreciation to these three speakers. Thank you very much for waiting. Now we'd like to deliver a commemorative performance by students of the Sophia Philharmonic Orchestra. Are you ready? The symphony is Eine kleine Nachtmusik, composed by Mozart. Thank you.
上智大学
Students of the Sophia Philharmonic Orchestra, thank you very much for your splendid performance.
それではこの
We now enter the second half of the conference, and we should like to proceed to the panel discussion. Please wait for a few more moments until we change the layout of the stage as we enter into the second half of the conference for the panel discussion.
それではお席の準備が整いました。
Since the stage is ready, could we ask the participants of the panel discussion to rise to the stage? Thank you. I hand over the microphone to Dr. Christian Berg, Hop Viken, director of the Norwegian Nobel Institute, who will be serving as the moderator for the panel discussion. Please go ahead, Dr. Hop Viken.
Welcome to the panel discussion. We have heard three very inspirational but also alarming keynotes. And luckily, we have also had some beautiful and inspiring music after the keynotes. We have heard from Mr. Terumi Tanaka, the co-chair of Nihon Hidankyo. We have heard from Ms. Michiko Kodama, Deputy Secretary General of Nihon Hidankyo, and we've also heard from Jørgen Vatne Frydnes, the chair of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. We will now move on to an expert panel, and in this panel we will explore further the status of nuclear disarmament and arms control today. We will be asking questions such as, in the rapidly changing global order that we are seeing around us, what is the role of nuclear weapons? We will ask, what are the existing international mechanisms that we have? And in the spirit of Nihon Hidankyo, how should nuclear disarmament figure in the education of a new generation? And not the least, discussing this subject here in Japan, the only country in the world that has been victim of a fully fledged nuclear attack, how can historical experience serve as a call to action? To discuss this, we have an eminent panel of experts here on stage. From the left to the right, we have Asle Toje. Dr. Toje is the vice chair of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. He is also an associate professor at Pembroke College at the University of Cambridge. We have Professor Nobumasa Akiyama, who comes from the Faculty of Law at Hitotsubashi University here in Tokyo. We have Professor Keiki Nakamura, who is at the Research Center for Nuclear Weapons Abolition at Nagasaki University. And last but not least, we have Professor Tara Taro Komatsu, who's at the Department of Education here at Sophia University. And before we dive into the panelists and what they have to tell us today, I do want to emphasize that this panel is constructed and will proceed on the basis of academic values. That does mean that each of the panelists speak in their personal capacity as academics, so they may ask uncomfortable questions and may ponder about dilemmas that we have to grapple with analytically, but that nonetheless may be difficult and perhaps ultimately, at least within the time at our disposal today, irresolvable. That does, for example, mean that my dear friend Asle Toje here, to the left, as seen from where you sit, speaks not in his capacity as the vice chair of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, although he certainly is. He speaks here in his capacity as an academic. We will now proceed as follows. We will first give each of the panelists a few minutes where they will each offer a reflection on the topic of today's conference. We will then move on to have a discussion in the panel. We will be pursuing both similarities and differences of opinion, and most importantly, we hope also to be identifying some paths to a world where we may not have to constantly worry about nuclear disaster. And before we close, we will give the word back to Nihon Hidankyo, the 2024 Nobel Peace Prize laureate, who will offer some brief comments on what they have heard in the panel discussion. So that is the plan. Are there any protests, any objections, any comments from the audience? If that is okay, we will proceed. So, Dr. Asle Toje, what are your thoughts on nuclear deterrence in a rapidly evolving global order?
Well, thank you so much for those kind words of introduction, Professor Hakkviken. And thank you so much to the representatives of Nihon, Hidankyo and the Hibakusha to help ground and focus this discussion. We are ever more often told that we are living in an age of great power politics, as if it were self-explanatory. The press only provides the general public with snapshots of the world political dramas that are now unfolding in Ukraine, Taiwan, and the Middle East. One war rarely comes alone. When the great powers collide, it is as if those sunglasses that we are wearing all the time, with their distorting filters, slide down our noses and we are forced to see reality in a glaring light. The term great power politics describes the point where different events flow together into currents. Let me mention a few such events. Very few of the world's heads of states even showed up for the United Nations high-level week last year. We should ask ourselves why. Russia has threatened the use of nuclear weapons. We should ask ourselves, against whom? And why have the mullahs of Iran suddenly become such good friends with the atheist communists of China? All questions worth asking. How come the Russian economy can grow faster than the Europeans when they are the ones being sanctioned by us? Why would the Republicans want to diminish America's role and responsibility in the world when this is supposed to be the very source of America's power and prestige? Well, after having built the system and pressured its allies inside it, the United States now suddenly seem reluctant to subscribe to its own gospel. So, where should we look when the experts are unreliable and the oracles are wrong? The challenge is narrative. That is, when the messages are chosen and angled so that they systematically confirm established truths or biases, humans have a tendency to choose comforting lies over stark realities, even when that means ignoring the truth. Political scientists such as myself has a tendency to divide international politics into three levels. The individual level, with its values, as represented by the Nihon Hidankyo, the state level, with its national interest, as represented by the Japanese government, who is refusing to sign up to the GMP, and then the systemic level, where power reigns. And power is ultimately the power of arms, the readiness for war. In world politics, long periods of stability can be replaced by short, sharp breaks, or an inflection point, as President Biden called it. He argued that the United States must yet again be ready to intervene militarily in order to avoid something worse. Unfortunately, the Americans were not convinced, and we ended up in a situation where the West is supporting what is basically a losing war in Ukraine, which will further undermine Western credibility in international affairs coming so shortly after Afghanistan. I guess you now understand why Christian was said that I'm not wearing my Nobel hat. All of this is important because in the current international system there is one state, the United States, that maintains the international order, that is supremely charged with maintaining international order. The Americans were the winners of World War II, and they built the post-war order around themselves, and again and around a series of values that we, who live in democracies at least, tend to subscribe to. Together with our many friends and allies, we all together constituted the West, the most powerful bloc of all time. Now we see that the West's leadership is being challenged. What we see is that most of the world have no sanctions against Russia. They do not answer the West's call. We are at a point where international order is on the verge of collapse in many regards, and we see a proliferation of war and threatening behavior. And that brings me to the point of this discussion, nuclear weapons. Well, Asle, I'm sure you would say, surely nuclear deterrence will lend stability to this system. That is what we have learned, isn't it? Nuclear weapons create stability. Far from it. Whilst nuclear weapons provided a modicum of stability in a bipolar order, now we see a proliferation of power to so many actors that the risk of miscalculation of the catastrophic kind increases as various powers engage in very risky behavior. Let me give you a couple of examples. Invading Ukraine is risky behavior. Bombing Iran is risky behavior. Attempting to create an exclusion zone around Taiwan is all risky behavior. This is the kind of behavior that the great powers would not have engaged in even 10 years ago. I believe that much like the temples of Kyoto, international order needs to be rebuilt, even if it's rebuilt in exactly the same way as it were. And I think one of the building blocks of future world order should be nuclear disarmament, rather than to view nuclear disarmament as a problem and to be so saddened by the presence of nuclear weapons, I think we should see this as an opportunity to create trust and meaningful cooperation amongst the great powers who possess these weapons. And I would like to end my comments with a quote by one of Japan's great peace philosophers, Daisaku Ikeda, who said something that is both banal but also intensely true. When we change, the world changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Toye, for laying out the larger perspective on the global order, which sets the stage very nicely for the rest of the discussion. We now move on to Professor Akiyama, and he'll talk about the status of the measures and institutions that are there or perhaps not there in order to prevent nuclear proliferation and to bring about nuclear disarmament. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Christian. すみません。日本語
Sorry, I was supposed to speak in Japanese. And thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm going to talk about the international regime. But before I go into my comment, already Chair Mr. Friedness and the two hibakshas have given extremely inspiring lectures. And I want to also make comments, but I have only been given 7 years. Peace is established by rules, and that's our aim. So I think it is upon me to abide by the timekeeping rules myself as well. But just one word. Mr. Friedness talked about nuclear and not to forget the nuclear disaster. It's important not to forget the nuclear disaster. From the younger generation, is there memory on nuclear disaster? No, it doesn't come naturally. They can only do it from making a choice if they wish to learn about nuclear disasters. Those who don't know Hiroshima and Nagasaki, members of the generation who are from that generation, and for the young generation to which my students are members of, we have to present a model on what choices they ought to make. And Professor Nakamura will probably talk about that, but we must never forget that. I used to reside in Hiroshima for 6 years, and that experience, unlike the other panelists, in the international political science, it would be based upon the quote-unquote reality of international political science. But we are researchers of nuclear, and we are researchers of security. But what is the roots of having to do study on security and nuclear matters? Hiroshima was a great experience in thinking about that. And in order to persuade the young generation to choose not to forget, what is the kind of education we ought to present to them in order to guide them to make such a choice? That's a very important point. So based upon that assumption, if I may go into my comment, the International Non-Proliferation Regime is based upon the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Committee. And they have been the foundation. Currently, there is the TPNW, Treaty on Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, and it's become one important treaty to come up with a world without nuclear weapons. But in reality today, there are 5 nuclear states who are participating, and from the perspective of having the 5 nuclear states participate and other countries participate, NPT continues to be an important fora if we want all of them to participate. So I think we need to focus on reinvigoration of the NPT. Through the TPNW, if we want to strengthen the nuclear taboo and nuclear norm, I think more importantly, rather than the TPNW, it's more important to reinvigorate the NPT regime. Why is that so? Because we will force the nuclear states to talk in a fora that discusses nuclear disarmament. So how should we make use of the NPT regime? If the NPT regime is to collapse, that would mean that for the 5 nuclear states, we would give them permission or excuse not to talk about nuclear disarmament. So how can we take advantage, maintain, and strengthen the NPT regime? This is a serious subject matter that we must think about seriously. So talking about the NPT IAEA regime, this regime is faced with several difficulties, one of which is geopolitical confrontation becoming ever more stringent. Needless to say, the United States and Russia are in conflict. The U.S. is also confronting China. And amongst these 3 major powers, how do they reduce nuclear risk? Unfortunately, there is no fora of dialogue between these 3 major states. And China is increasing nuclear warheads by 100 per annum. Russia is about to develop a new nuclear weapon, and the United States, in response, is thinking about whether they should increase their own nuclear forces. The second geopolitical issue is Russia's war against Ukraine and their behavior. You recall when this opinion of nuclear sharing gave rise in Japan. Why was that so? Along with China expanding its nuclear force, Russia may use nuclear weapons. Many thought that that could become a possibility. Russia is employing the use of nuclear weapons in fighting unconventional weapons-based war. So this major power, who is a nuclear state, imposes pressure on new nuclear state, and that pattern was similar to the situation in East Asia, and that was probably the reason that this public opinion gave rise in Japan. But this was not limited to Japan. Many people around the world, in other countries as well, felt the danger of use of nuclear weapons. And next, the proliferation risk rising. North Korea is constantly increasing its nuclear weapons, and currently they are sending ammunition to Russia and troops to Russia, and in exchange they are receiving missile technology from Russia and probably technology regarding nuclear from Russia. And the proceeds that they gain from Russia is probably going to be invested in nuclear weapons development. And next, Iran. In the case of Iran, there are compound issues. One, there's the gray zone in the IAEA regime, and Iran is taking advantage of the loopholes in the IAEA system, and they have come very close to possessing nuclear weapons. So that's the regime loophole. And then, against such behavior by Iran, we're not questioning the legitimacy of the behavior of Iran, and the international community is trying to destruct their nuclear program by force. In other words, this system of IAEA has allowed Iran to come close to possession, and another problem is by force rather than rules or negotiations. There's an example of trying to persuade Iran by force. And the third issue is probably most relevant to this forum, and that is with regards to the divide deepening regarding nuclear disarmament. this conflict between nuclear deterrence and nuclear disarmament has been much talked about, so I'm not going to revisit that issue. But the gap between the Treaty on the Ban of Nuclear Weapons versus NPT, how do we fill the gap? That's a big question. And many countries that have acceded to the NPT thinks that the nuclear weapons issues is, in addition to nuclear disarmament, the gap of forces in the global community. Those with nuclear weapons are with power, and those without nuclear weapons is without power. So that inequality is the roots of the problem. So when we say that this is a problem of nuclear and shed light on that issue, we also must not forget the inequality that exists in this international community. So even while we face these issues, as I've said, NPT is a regime where many diverse stakeholders are still participating, and it's probably the only fora that has continued to attract different stakeholders. So how do we rebuild this regime? One is restoring political reliability and centering around nuclear states. We should oblige the nuclear states to report to the international community how they are going about with nuclear disarmament, and change the NPT regime to a venue that offers many fora to discuss those issues. Second, we need to fill the regime loophole. Now, this is an area that requires expertise, so I will be simple, but Iran, something that happened in Iran could happen somewhere else. So we need to fill such loophole. And third, again, we must try to promote and facilitate dialogue. No matter what we say is right, if what we say isn't reaching those people, it's meaningless. And it's like the north wind. If you say something critical, the listener may close his doors, but we have to say something that would open their doors, and that's why dialogue under NPT regime is so important. That's important at the national level, it's important at the technical experts level, and so multi-layer platform is necessary, and NPT should function as such multi-layered platform. Of course, Hibakusha has to participate, and citizens of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have to participate, and there has to be dialogue between those people and the policymakers. Sorry, time is up, so this will be my final words. To the government and to the municipalities, I have a request. We are engaged in research on nuclear disarmament and how we can pass on to the next generation, but investment has to increase in this area. And the leaders who are policymakers in this area and academia and grassroots, we more often have to touch upon the actual experience of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and continue the history of non-use of nuclear weapons. So that's one point that all of us, be it academia or grassroots, can agree upon, including political leaders. So that should be the starting point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Akiyama. That is also the perfect segue to the next panelist, Professor Keiki Nakamura. Nagasaki has been a pioneer in peace education, which the previous speaker just touched upon, and you have followed those efforts very, very closely as a researcher. What can we learn from the Nagasaki experience?
Thank you very much. My name is Nakamura, and I'm so honored to be invited to this panel. Already, the issue of education and the importance of education have been brought up by a few speakers. And in addition to that point, I also would like to talk about what role peace education and disarmament education is playing today. But as has been repeatedly mentioned, the world has become extremely difficult and complicated in terms of nuclear issues. And in this challenging context, talking about education may sound like a detour for many people, but all the more so because we are in such age, we have to seriously think what role education can play. That's probably the avenue to maximize the effect of what the Hibakusha has been delivering as a message. As Mr. Friedis has said, the nuclear taboo is faced with the crisis of demise. And of course, that's partly a risk at the national level, but it also is a risk to the minds of individuals like ourselves. People talk about the fortress of peace that's supposed to be existent in each of our hearts. So, confidence building, dialogue, diplomacy, confidence on such measures is fading. On the other hand, nuclear deterrence and nuclear weapons should be relied upon. That voice probably is rising within our own hearts as well, and that is observable in many countries around the world, and Japan is no exception. And also at the city where a bomb was dropped, even in Nagasaki, that's true. I live in Nagasaki, and along with Hiroshima, we have injected much energy and time into education regarding the damage of a bomb. 9th of August, in all schools of Nagasaki will be open. Students will come to school on 9th of August to listen to the lecture of Hibakusha. And many classes are being offered to teach them regarding the damage. No more war, no more A-bomb. Peace is important. Yes, to a certain extent, we've delivered outcome in delivering such results. So, with the aging of Hibakusha, it's all the more so important to pass on this memory to the next generation. However, at this stage, the most important point I wish to make is that unfortunately such an effort is insufficient. In other words, if we truly want, especially the young generation, to become leaders of peace, we have to go a step further in terms of asking ourselves the question and acting upon it. For 13 years, I've resided in Nagasaki, and during this time, there are many young people who had received peace education, elementary school, secondary school students, and I've talked to so many of them, and repeatedly I hear them say, we should abolish nuclear weapons. We should never allow nuclear weapons to be used, but it's not pragmatic, because without the nuclear weapons, the world may become more unstable. And also, including Japan, we have no means but to rely on the nuclear umbrella. Such skepticism is overwhelmingly the majority, even in the cities that have experienced A-bombs. And these are places where there are more opportunities than other cities to learn about the inhumanity of nuclear weapons. But under the label of security, they cannot erase the thinking that it may be necessary. Nuclear weapons may be necessary. One reason is the limit of trying to communicate to the emotions. We've been telling no wars. War is bad. A-bombs are bad. Even if they feel so in their emotions, they don't know how they can realize a world without nuclear weapons, or how they can build a war without wars. So they understand the ultimate goal, but what's the pathway to that ultimate goal? And they haven't given lessons on that. So that leads to them saying, but we have no means, we can't do anything. So they give up. So in this complicated security situation, we have to make them feel ownership. So we have to give them the force to take action. Education that we hadn't done in the past is necessary. So specifically, what needs to be done? One key is to add the chapter of disarmament in the conventional peace education. We should insert that factor, the factor of disarmament education. Why are countries confronting each other? Why are countries in conflict? Like Professor Akiyama said, why is it the case that nuclear weapons aren't eradicated? What do we have in our hands? What are the means available to abolish these weapons? So disarmament, nuclear disarmament, and international law ought to be taught in order to learn about those means. And that has to be done from elementary school to secondary school levels and to higher education levels. Disarmament lesson is not just about teaching the facts and knowledge about disarmament. Squarely confronting reality, thinking about the ways not to have to rely on force, and creating a future through dialogue with others. So, critical thinking, dialogue capability, and imagination. So, if these capabilities are afforded to these students, that could become a big power to fill the gap between idealism and reality. So I'm running out of time, but the following are points. These are the points that I think that should be factored into education. Number one, re-question nuclear deterrence. Currently, we're dependent on nuclear deterrence, but is this regime of security protecting us? I talked about the gap between idealism and realism, but is deterrence reality, and is abolition of weapons idealism? We should re-question that. Who is being protected by nuclear weapons, and is possessing nuclear weapons in itself tolerated? Of course, everyone knows that use of weapons is going to lead to catastrophe. I don't think there is any objection, but what about just possessing? You have to go through development, manufacture, and all those steps cause damage in terms of nuclear damage. So such injustice has to be revisited. Finally, once again, the journey of hibakusha should be reintroduced into education. The message delivered by hibakusha was not just about inhumanity of A-bombs, how human beings can cut the chain reaction of hatred and retaliation. So we can learn much of that from the behavior of hibakusha today, and that's going to become even more important in education in the months and years ahead. So we should not limit just the education not to knowledge. We have to shift to education in this 80th year of historical milestone to now practice education with the future vision in mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Nakamura. Professor Komatsu, Nihon Hidankyo and hibakusha played a key role in preserving the history, and we already heard Professor Nakamura speak about this, preserving the history of nuclear weapons. What, in your opinion, is the role of that historical knowledge in inspiring future action?
Thank you. Thank you, Christian. 私は核兵器廃絶に向けた平和教育について、世界的な平和教育の潮流の中にそれを位置づけ、今後の展望を含めてお話をしたいと思います。1990年以前、冷戦下では世界では軍縮教育、反核教育、国際理解教育等がいわゆる平和教育の枠組みで実施されていました。 日本では、戦争の参加について教える平和教育が活発に行われていましたし、それは今でも続いています。冷戦終結後は世界各地で言語や宗教が異なる集団間の武力衝突が多く起きました。この課題に応えるために紛争後社会では国内の不平等や不公平、いわゆるヨハン・ガルトゥングの言う構造的暴力ですね、これをなくすための批判的思考力、問題解決能力の
Sorry, may I intervene? We have a translation problem. There is Japanese in all.
Sorry. Sorry. Can you hear me? Sorry. Can you hear me? Sorry.
I'm happy to repeat all.
Unfair to have you cut short in this manner. Is that okay?
Everything's okay. Can I just simply continue?
Sorry to those who understand Japanese who will then have to listen to the message twice. But please. Yes, you can continue in Japanese. We now have translation on the ear. But if you could start from the beginning, or at least give a short version of what you have already said, so that we're all speaking from the same basis.
So do you want me to repeat in Japanese? Okay.
Yes, in Japanese is fine, but just brief.
Very good.
Toward the abolition of nuclear weapon, I would like to position the peace education in the current of the world peace education. I'd like to show the outlook. During the Cold War until 1990, disarmament education, anti-nuclear education, or international understanding education have been carried out in Japan. Peace education have been carried out in Japan to talk about the tragedy of the war, and that continue till today. After the end of the Cold War, in different parts of the world, the military conflict with a different religion and the languages have erupted in different parts of the world. In order to resolve this, the inequality or injustice, or in order to eliminate the so-called structural violence by Dr. Johan Gaturung, then the human rights education or multicultural education have been carried out. Then, in recent years, the promotion of SDGs have been promoted, and also the pandemic COVID-19 have promoted the global citizens education, or the education for the ESD. So these events have become the opportunity to promote the ESD and the SDG. So we can say this is the promotion of the advancement of a peace education. And then afterwards, the strengthening of the defense capability have been talked about after the Ukraine war, and also there is a revisit of the threat of use of a nuclear weapon, while the multinationalism has been promoted. However, the tragedy of the nuclear weapon will gain the further importance, and that needs to be further communicated. Mr. Tanaka Terumi, Nihon Hidankyo, said that the inhumanity of nuclear weapon should be perceived with sensitivity. Such kind of opportunity is necessary. That is his speech in the Nobel laureate speech, and that was repeated in today's speech as well. In the conflicts I was involved in, the shared memory have been formed. The reality other than conflicts and the story of family members who are affected by the conflicts have been shared through these shared memories. As a result, the settlement among the relevant parties and the solidarity for the prevention of the conflict is being promoted as the sole A-bomb countries from the viewpoint of dignity of mankind. Japan is expected to promote the international solidarity. As Friedness Chair said, that the memory of A-bomb damage is not unique to the Japan. It should be the shared memory of the world, and I think that is very important. And next, I would like to touch upon the 2 points important in the peace education. The first one is the long-term and the indirect damage understanding, which is caused by war and the conflict in Hiroshima with the A-bombing until 1945, 140,000. In Nagasaki, approximately 70,000 people are said to be dead. And then with the burns and the radiation disorder, many people passed away. The so-called related deaths is not grasped. War and conflicts destroy the basic infrastructure of daily lives. Because of dysfunction of the hospitals, many lives must have been lost in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan. In these conflicts, direct death is approximately 900,000. Indirect death is 3.8 million, which is 4 times larger than that of direct death. In Sudan and the Congo Republic, the conflict-related deaths, 90% of them are said to be the indirect causes, according to some data. Human cause by the wars and conflict is in the mid and long term beyond the direct impact, and there is a discrimination and a prejudice, and that is something we have to understand. And the second point is that to have a further long-term perspective, which is based on the responsibility for the next generation. According to the current projection for the next 100 years, almost 10 billion people will be born. 500 years ago, for the same 100-year period, 200,000 people have been born. 2 billion people have been born. For the next 100 years, 5 times more people will be born, which means that compared to people 500 years ago, we have a bigger influence toward the future, and we have a bigger responsibility, much bigger than those people in the past. Compared to the conventional weapon, the intensity of a tragedy and the destruction is quite immense with nuclear weapons. That is not limited to the direct destructive power, but also the life of the future generation might be deprived of. So going forward, based on the, we have to incorporate the recognition of the past, and based on the long-termism, we have to carry out the peace education. That's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Komatsu. So, if I may start out referring back to the chair of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, Jørgen Frydnes, who in his remarks drew attention to the nuclear taboo. He expressed his concern that the nuclear taboo is under threat. And Professor Nakamura, in your introduction, you asked whether the nuclear taboo may be seen too narrowly, to include only use. And I think Professor Akiyama touched upon the same issue, whether this is seen so too narrow a conception, and that we should really not only refer to the use, but also the possession of nuclear arms when we talk about the nuclear taboo. Nihon Hidankyo has certainly drawn attention to both use and possession. And I wonder whether there is a real tension here, or whether this is a false contradiction. In other words, is it possible to see the possession of nuclear arms as entirely legitimate, even if one is seeing their use as subject to a taboo?
Thank you very much. Most likely, possession of nuclear weapons is questioned because there's a question on whether security relying on nuclear deterrence is appropriate or not. No use of nuclear weapons, at least that rather than setting that as a long-term objective, in order to achieve a world without nuclear weapons, it should at least be an important benchmark, because currently there are different stakeholders in different positions, so we should tentatively set that as our short-term goal. Rather than saying that it's a target or goal, we should present it as a concept where diverse stakeholders may be attracted to participate. If there are weapons, can deterrence be achieved? If you think about it in detail, what is a security without depending on nuclear deterrence? That would mean deterrence without using nuclear. So how can such a deterrence be achieved without relying on nuclear weapons? And further, when you think about deterrence, it's an issue of relationship. So unilaterally, if we stop calling for deterrence, our counterpart may or may not reciprocate. So how are we confident that the counterpart will reciprocate? Recently, amongst politicians, nuclear weapons are cheap, some said. Then, can nuclear deter cyber attacks? This threat of cyber attack or nuclear weapons, should we seriously respond to such blackmail? These are threats in various security assumptions. So in such scenarios, many different means may be necessary. But if the counterpart possesses nuclear weapons, what kind of self-constraint would be possible in order for us to be confident that they will not use the weapon? One is deterrence, but of course, what we need to pursue is the reduction of the threat itself. So if we do a unilateral declaration, is something going to happen? If unfortunately we are not in such a circumstance, how do we facilitate dialogue? How do we persuade them to come to the negotiating table? We have to strategically think about the ways to enable us to do that. Thank you.
Mr. Nakamura.
Thank you very much. Then, as mentioned by Professor Akiyama, non-use of nuclear weapons. This norm should be strengthened. This norm should be maintained, upheld, and strengthened. It's an important benchmark, and I completely agree. But when we talk about education, if we think about the conventional peace education or disarmament education, one of the things we haven't been able to do enough is to rethink the legitimacy of possession itself. And Professor Akiyama talked about whether nuclear deterrence is right or wrong, or the internal risk, the innate risk of deterrence should be clarified and elucidated. And as I said in my initial remark, just possessing nuclear weapons, existence of nuclear weapons, maintaining this international community with its existence is costly, overwhelmingly costly. But that fact regarding prohibitive cost has not been focused sufficiently. So nuclear test causing damage, I mentioned that in my initial remark, but in all stages, including development and manufacturing already, nuclear weapons are causing much damage. Then who had fell victim? It's constantly in this world those who are in weak positions. For example, when a nuclear test is conducted, it's conducted in a colonial state, and there could be ethnic discrimination or gender inequality, and that kind of injustice in this international community is common to the injustice of nuclear weapons. Professor Komatsu talked about the SDGs, leaving no one behind. That's the kind of world we are trying to build. And if we are trying to walk towards such a direction, then a world with nuclear weapons is completely against that direction we are trying to pursue. So we have not been able to have such kind of discussion enough to date. So nuclear taboo should also mean not just taboo of use, but taboo of possession. Expand the definition, and that's the message we need to deliver, especially from Japan. Can we do that? That's the big question.
Thank you. I want to turn to Dr. Toye here. There's seemingly a tension among analysts on nuclear disarmament, where some argue that a nuclear-free world is simply unrealistic, and that what we need to focus on is achievable goals, such as a commitment of nuclear states to no first use. Others argue that full disarmament is the only way of realistically preventing the future use of nuclear arms. Now, are really those two strategies, if we look at it from a political perspective and from the perspective, for that matter, of political activism, are those two strategies incompatible? Or can we simultaneously pursue both the short-term goal of reducing risk through strategies such as no first use and the long-term goal of a world free of nuclear arms?
Well, thank you for that question. I must underline, I'm just speaking as an academician here. I think that the idea of total disarmament overnight is totally unrealistic and, frankly, unhelpful. I think, as you mentioned, one way to build on the engagement of the Hibakusha. One way to build on the engagement of the Hibakusha and the nuclear taboo is through the policy of no first use, which does not really require any institutional overbuilding and could either be implemented through a multilateral regime or through links of bilateralism. And I frankly think that is the most credible path ahead for distrustful great powers such as the United States, Russia and China, as you pointed out.
Any other comments on that? I'm not sure you responded to my question as to whether there is a real tension. No. Can you be doing both? Of course, you said it's unhelpful, but is it...
Of course you can be doing both, but I think we live in a world where we have some 10,000 nuclear weapons on the ready, and these nuclear weapons make sense within the logic of the countries that have them, and they make zero sense from the point of view of humanity and survival on this planet, and that gap needs to be broached, but I think it would have to be some sort of gradual shift towards a ever lower number of nuclear weapons that over time political leaders will start realizing that these weapons are very expensive and not suitable really to any military purpose other than mass terror and Holocaust.
Thank you. I want to turn to you, Professor Komatsu. In light of what we have already heard your fellow panelists lay out in terms of challenges and avenues ahead, and your own work on history and the role of history, and certainly the role of the history of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, of Hibakusha. Do you really think that world leaders and others are certainly welcome to speak to this as well? Do you think that world leaders are ultimately, given the magnitude of destruction that we know unfolded in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, do you think that they are aware of the magnitude of destruction that nuclear arms represent? And if not, is there a way in which we can educate them?
Well, let me see. That it is not easy to communicate on the abhorrence or the tragedy of the war, especially the next generation does not have such kind of experience, but they are having an imagination and adding the interpretation, and then that needs to be passed on and communicated. That is necessary at the school on a daily basis. Then that is what the teacher should do at the school. Well, this might be deviating from Christian's question. Well, last year, Nihon Hidankyo was awarded with Nobel Peace Prize. To be honest with you, I was surprised to some extent. In different parts of the world, in conflicts, the peace building education or peace education have been carried out, and I saw those peace education. But there aren't so much discussion on the importance of communicating on the war damage, but the critical capability or the democratic philosophy were emphasized in the education. The Professor Nakamura talked about its importance. Well, looking at the Japanese peace education, I don't think it is sufficient just to communicate on the damage of the war only. To begin with, whether to use a weapon or not, whether to resolve the problem with weapons or not, when you make such kind of a judgment, whether you are fully comprehending the consequences of the use of those weapons, is it fully understood? That was the question I had. So in communicating the horror of the war, the Nihon Hidankyo became the Nobel laureate. With that regard, it was quite significant from that perspective. Why is it that around the world the education is not done focusing on communicating the damages of the war? Because the war memory is so fresh, and therefore as the party they may not want to talk about it. When the nation is involved in the passing the history, the damage nationalism, victim nationalism. So as a result of communicating on the war damage, that will trigger the those idea, and that is why there is no proactive peace education around the world to focus on the war damage. That is my impression. In case of Japan, in communicating the memory of war damage, it was not associated with the nationalism. That is my impression, because the private sector, like Nihon Hidankyo, play a proactive role. That might be the reason. From that perspective, how we communicate the war might be unique here in Japan compared to the rest of the world. So I believe that this is the one of the approach where we can communicate to the rest of the world, and I think it is worthwhile to practice such kind of education.
Thank you, Professor Okayama.
ちょっと2フィンガーインターベンションで、実は
Let me intervene. Last year I visited Colombia, and as you know, there's civil war still ongoing in Colombia, and the passing over of memory of civil war. Through the transfer of memory, they are trying to achieve national reconciliation, and the government is doing that as a state project. So they're hosting exhibitions and art exhibits, and by using such opportunities, they preserve genocide-related artifacts and material, and they are currently working to have the memory embedded in the minds of the people. And I had the opportunity to talk with a person who was in charge of the program, and regarding solidarity with Hiroshima and Nagasaki and partnership with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this person was very enthusiastic to establish such kind of partnership. Professor Komatsu talked about shared memory. At the global level, we should have global shared memory. And victims of war, I think there are commonalities between victims of war. And Hidankyo are doing activities not just about A-bombs, but you have been fighting against prejudice and discrimination in the society. So you have common experience as those people in Colombia. So how do we globally share the memory. I think we need to do more of that, and we need to do more research in that subject. Do I have time? I'll be short. When we talk about passing over memory, when we shed light on damage in Nagasaki and in Hiroshima, you talked about the relationship with nationalism, but the hibakusha contained not just Japanese citizens. There were many people who suffered the damage, who were forced to come to Japan during war. So that is the history of the hibakusha. And as you said, in the civil society, this kind of episodes have been passed on. And one positive effect is those people and history shed light not just on the damage, but there has been efforts continued in order to speak about the perpetrators as well. But in the future, the memory on the A-bomb will become weaker, and I feel the crisis that the suffering or the perpetrator's memory will weaken. There are Korean hibakushas, and there's no Korean hibakushas who are testifying on the peninsula, and all have passed away already. So people may say that their voices were never heard. They didn't raise their voices. So what do we communicate to the younger generation? That's something that we have to seriously think about. And just one more point. Again, deterrence. And Professor Akiyama said something about deterrence. And in the future, nuclear weapons are terrifying. All the more so because they are terrifying, they become deterrent. And that fact may become strongly embedded in our minds. I'm fearful of that. Because if it's that devastating, people should say, never use such a thing. That used to be the natural direction. But many people are saying that because the power of nuclear weapons is devastating, it becomes effective as a deterrent. And I'm scared that that kind of concept is going to spread. So, along with the talk of deterrence, we also must speak about the fear of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid time runs far too quickly, but we'll have one last round, and we will try to elicit the optimism that you may all carry in you. We are certainly living at a time where we see that existing nuclear disarmament measures have been largely dismantled. We also see a number of new challenges, new technological developments, mounting political instability, and we see a return to a belief in the use of hard military power. One can, of course, easily feel helpless in the face of such challenges. But as I said, I'd like to elicit little optimism that I'm sure you all have in you. And I'd like you to use, and we'll have to limit each comment here to 1 minute, which is a little bit unfair because it's not an easy question. But here comes the question. What positive developments do you see? And where should we invest our hope? Where should we invest our energies? I'd like to go about it in the reverse order from how we started, if that's okay. Professor Komatsu, would you like to start?
Well, let me see. Yesterday, on NHK program called Professional, Hadashi no Gen is the Japanese comic which was translated into English, mostly in the United States and around the world. They are available for reading, and those initiatives were broadcasted. So we have to there are some approaches that is communicatable for younger generation. We can get the idea from younger generation how effectively we can communicate, and we have to get such kind of idea from younger generation.
They don't have a place on stage today, so we'll take note of that for the next opportunity. Professor Nakamura.
Where should we inject our energy into? Of course, there's so many areas where we must inject energy, but today, why are youth hesitant to face the issue of nuclear weapons? One reason may be that there is no hope. In the Japanese society and in the global community, that kind of trend may be spreading universally, but I gained power from the hibakusha. Likewise, human beings have been powerful, so why don't we focus on success stories? We are in challenging times. On social media, on television, all you see is sad news, grievance. But why don't we shed light on success stories that humanity can cause changes, especially to the youth, and let them understand that they have the power? That's where we ought to be investing.
Professor Akiyama.
2 points. One, world without nuclear weapons. We are to pursue that goal, and that kind of intention should be presented as the common intention of the whole global community. Already, the discussion on post-SDGs has commenced. SDGs were a rule or goals set in the United Nations as something that humanity ought to be pursued. But a world without nuclear weapons is not included in the SDGs. So how can we make a world without nuclear weapons a common goal for humanity? And that's where diplomatic resources ought to be invested into. And new technology. Another point is new technology, AI, quantum computing. So there are these emerging technologies. How can we take advantage of them for the sake of peace? We should invest in such academic studies. So the use of new technology and use the young brains towards that end. Thank you.
Thank you. And then finally, Asli Toye.
Well, thank you so much for a wonderful panel. And I very much agree that we need to store our hopes in the youth. We need to use the technology, and certainly we do need to listen to the guidance of the hibakusha. But if we were to be a cold-blooded realist, every time that we have made significant strides towards nuclear disarmament has been in times of crisis. So, although we live in challenging times, our times also represents an opportunity to be better, to get the job done this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all four of you, and thank you for frankly surprising me by being able to respond to what I thought would be a very difficult questions with individual, thoughtful, and very helpful insights. So I want to join you all in giving a hand to our four eminent panelists. And while you may not have made us any less concerned, you have certainly enlightened us, you have left us much better informed, and you have, if anything, convinced us of the need for action. So before we close the conference, let us again hear from those who have committed their life to action, those who have turned the misfortune of being the victims of nuclear bombing into powerful resistance against atomic weapons, to Nihon Hidankyo. Please, a microphone.
Tanaka speaking. This was an extraordinary panel discussion, and I learned so much. Thank you very much. Nihon Hidankyo was granted the Nobel Peace Prize, and we're so glad that we were able to create this kind of outcome as a result of the prize winning. I felt that there is no such thing as deterrence by nuclear weapons. There is no such thing. And everyone on this planet ought to recognize that there is no such thing as deterrence by nuclear weapons. Because what are nuclear weapons? It's difficult for people to imagine what they're like. But if they begin to understand what nuclear weapons are like, people will be persuaded that they must never exist on Earth. Then, if they don't exist, then there could be the word deterrence can be erased from our dictionary. And because there are conflicts, people begin to say that deterrence is necessary. But what are the causes of all conflicts around this planet? I think we ought to analyze the reasons why these conflicts are occurring and remove the cause of these disputes. And if such efforts are made, we will see fewer wars. Humanity is a good being, benevolent. Children don't wage war when they are born. So if we continue to be human beings from day one of birth, people will not have waged war. But during education, they are faced with competition. And through child rearing, not just through formal school education, maybe that kind of seeds for conflict is bred. That's my personal view, not Hidankyo's view. So let's tackle from there, because in Japan, there's fierce competition from the infantry level, and competition means you have an enemy. Then you are left without people whom you can trust. Then the personality of such a person becomes unstable. So foster people who are trustworthy, and people and human beings are all lovable people who are wonderful. That's the kind of education that ought to be pursued. So that was the image I got from listening to your discussion, and I'm much encouraged. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Oh, we'll have one more comment. Sorry. Mr. Kodama, please.
If I may be allowed to make a comment. You talked about education, and thank you for sharing many points regarding education, and I learned much from listening to the discussion. Teaching about war, and Japan was a perpetrator, in fact. And Japan caused much suffering and damage to Asians. What Russia is doing today was done by the Japanese, and that's something that we must teach the young people. When I meet young students and talk about my experience, I ask them to take on my message and pass on my message to others. So I tell them, you're next. In order to prevent you from becoming a hibakusha, each one of you must consider this as your own problem. It's not the other's problem. There are 12,000 nuclear weapons, which means that this could become a planet of death. So I tell that to them. And as I said, Japan used to be on the side of causing damage. And that's a truth that we have to teach the children. That's important. So I always say at the end of my lecture that Japan was the country that caused the damage, and we must therefore work towards abolition of nuclear weapons. And it's your own problem. In order for you not to become the victim, you have to take ownership in this movement. That's what I tell them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tanaka-san. Thank you so much, Kodama-san. You are very good listeners, and therefore you are also good teachers. The words are so powerful and so heartfelt that I will abstain from any other further comment. But I will ask you to hereafter come to all seminars that I'm engaged in to sum up and offer concluding reflections. Thank you to you both, and thank you to all the members of Nihon Hidankyo for the work you have done and for the work you continue to do. We take inspiration from you, and we certainly hear your call to heed your memories and to carry them forward. Our future depends on it. Dear Professor Umemiya, sorry, I will now leave it to you to close the panel. But before that, let me first, on behalf of the Norwegian Nobel Committee and the Norwegian Nobel Institute, say a warm thank you to you and to your colleagues here at Sophia University, and there are so many of you who have worked hard to make this possible, for all that you have done in order to enable today's discussion. And let me also again express my deep felt gratitude to the representatives of Nihon Hidankyo, the 2024 Nobel Peace Prize laureate, for your cooperation in making today's conference possible. I'm honored, I am humbled, and I am grateful. Thank you all for sharing your knowledge. Professor Umemiya.
Director Half Beacon, thank you very much for your warm word. The moderator, Director Half Beacon, panelist, Dr. Toya, Dr. Akiyama, Dr. Nakamura, and Dr. Komatsu, thank you very much. Mr. Tanaka and Ms. Kodama from Nihon Hidankyo, thank you for your invaluable comments. Once again, please give them a round of applause. Thank you. We would like to ask speakers to come back to your seat. Now we have covered all the agenda items of today's program. The Nobel Peace Prize conference in Tokyo, responding to the threat of nuclear weapons, which have lasted for long hours. Audience in the venue and online viewers via YouTube, how was today's conference? I myself, through lectures by 3 speakers at the beginning, followed by a panel discussion and precious interactions with the audience, I myself find this conference a great opportunity to think deeply once again the necessity of abolition of nuclear weapons. The Chair Friedner said in his keynote speech, quote, "Tell the stories, study the history, resist the forgetting, raise your voice because our survival depends on it," unquote. I come to be keenly aware the extreme significance for each individual resisting the forgetting and raise their voice. And also, Ms. Kodama mentioned the importance of having an ownership and see that as your own problem. So and now I would like to bring the Nobel Peace Prize Conference in Tokyo to a closure. Thank you for staying with us till the end. Please return home safely. Thank you.